So you want to start a video podcast and have no idea where to start. Well, stay tuned because in this video, I will take you through my entire process that I use to publish an episode from beginning to end. Welcome everybody, this is Umair Sheikh and welcome to my channel, which is dedicated to shedding light on all the careers possible. And on today's video, I will be discussing what goes on in the career of a podcaster, and more specifically, the entire process of publishing an episode. So if you're interested in learning the step-by-step process to podcasting, tune in for the rest of the video. How do I know this process? Well, although I am a lawyer by day, I am also the host of the My Career Shop podcast, which you can check out in this channel under the playlist My Career Shop. It's a video podcast available on YouTube and also available through audio on the major platforms like Spotify, Apple Music, etc., etc. I handle the entire process of podcasting from getting the guests to publishing the episode. I learned this process from scratch, and to be very honest with you, I really don't know what level of podcasting I'm really at because I've never really gone on anyone else's podcast or spent time with another podcaster. Regardless, now that I've published many episodes and recorded in audio, remote, and in-person video formats, I know my system at least. And in this video, I will take you through the exact steps that I take for each episode. Not the equipment to podcast, the actual process. Because when I was starting off, I really struggled to find that information and I made a lot of mistakes along the way. So in terms of the main equipment, which is relevant to this video, because my process is going to be tailored to my use case, I use a Mac, Rodecaster Pro 2, and Sony ZV-E10s. The reason why I chose these is because finding tutorials for them was the easiest, and that matters a lot when you know nothing. So anyways, in terms of how I got started, the year was 2023. And for years, I was thinking about how many careers there were out there and if there is any place where I can get the inside scoop of what actually happens in the day-to-day of different careers. As choosing a career is a huge decision. And then I thought to myself, man, a podcast would be a great idea because the only people that would really know this information are the professionals themselves. So I'll just start a podcast and I'll ask each professional about their career. And that was the impetus to starting the My Career Shop podcast. So first thing I would recommend is figure out why you are starting a podcast because you will need to remind yourself many times during the process. Anyways, after that epiphany that I had, the next step was, how do I get this thing started? So whenever you're starting something, it feels like you're about to climb Mount Everest, especially when you're new to it. I'm a lawyer by trade, so podcasting was completely new to me as they don't teach that stuff in law school. And although in the beginning it appeared as a tall task, a few hundred YouTube videos later and tackling problems as they arose and constantly updating the process, I was able to figure out how to get audio from a mic to the computer and video from a camera to the computer, and then line up the audio and video on Adobe Premiere Pro. And trust me, at that time, that was a huge accomplishment for me. I remember I was like, yes, I figured it out. Now I can run my own podcast. Little did I know at the time how much actually went into one single episode, if you're doing it by yourself at least. Although hard, a podcast illiterate individual such as myself was able to figure it out and create a decent video podcast. So trust me, if I can do it, you can as well. But before you actually get into it, just know that there's a lot more to podcasting than simply recording audio and video and dumping it into Adobe Premiere and exporting the file. If you're getting into this space, just remember, take it day by day. Don't expect to learn it over a day, week, or even a month, as it takes time, lots of errors, which I hope this video helps you navigate. All that said, in order to get a video podcast episode up on YouTube, here is my process. But before I actually slide into the details, please hit the subscribe button and give a thumbs up so the algorithm actually begins to love my channel. So when I say a video podcast, what do I mean? There are three main types of podcasting. One, there is an audio podcast, which is simply the host and their guests, and they have their audio recorded on mics. Two, remote podcasting, where the host and guest meet up online and record the episode on some platform in audio or video format. And three, in-person video podcasting, where you actually invite the guest to your studio, sit across from them, look them in the eye, and have a deep, long conversation, all while being recorded by cameras. So when I say video podcast, I'm talking about in-person video podcasts, like Joe Rogan's. Now, I've tried all three, and I gotta say, there is a huge difference in the effort and cost required with the three types of podcasting. And maybe I'll make a video highlighting those differences, but this episode is about the process for a video podcast. So here it goes. All podcast episodes, regardless of whether they are audio or video, can be broken into 3 chunks, which simply put are the steps required before recording, the actual recording of the episode, and post-recording, which if you're a professional podcaster, you would call these steps pre-production, production, and post-production. Starting with the steps before recording. Essentially, before you record, you have to first get a guest, which I believe when you are starting off is the most difficult aspect surrounding podcasting. Until you are a relevant authority or have a large following, not many people care to come onto your podcast so they can be seen or heard by your 7 subscribers, who everyone knows are your family and friends. Then to top it off, you can't even outsource guest bookings because the podcast booking agencies, they don't want to speak to you until you have a website, Instagram account with multiple posts, and at least 20 episodes. This last requirement about needing 20 episodes is due to a phenomenon called pod fade, which is when a podcast show gradually stops releasing new episodes and eventually fades into non-existence. Essentially, podcasters lose motivation along the way, and the agencies aren't really wrong. Because according to the Medium, 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. And of the remaining 10, 90% of them don't make it to episode 20. So if you make it to 21, you are in the top 1% of podcasters. But on the flip side, I feel like if the booking agencies actually helped, you'd be able to get past that threshold. Because to be very honest with you, getting guests is not easy. If y'all have suggestions, please comment below because the most common recommendation I've gotten is to look into your own network. So for me, I did that, but I only got a few guests. So in order for me to get guests, I had to research and email people. And from several hundred emails, a few responded. And then from those few, some of them referred me to another guest, which is how I've gotten most of my guests to date. This is where remote podcasting is significantly easier because you can simply go onto a site like podcastguest.com and for free, just see thousands of people who would be willing to appear as a remote guest on your podcast, which I have been doing recently, to be very honest. Anyways, once you actually get that elusive guest, I send them information regarding my podcast, what it's about, what will be discussed during the episode, because most guests don't want to be surprised about what they will be asked when they appear before. So you have to prepare them a little bit. For the My Career Shop podcast, I talked to a professional from a different career on each episode. For example, I interviewed an accountant on episode 1, a real estate agent on episode 2, a lawyer on episode 3, and so on. For each guest, I prepared questions regarding the career I'm questioning them about. So for instance, when I was discussing the career of a nurse practitioner on episode 7, I had to spend time researching nurse practitioners, their salary, what they do, and a lot more. This requires time and effort to research the topic, followed by putting the questions together, followed by sending them over to the guest, followed by answering any of the questions the guest may have about the materials. After they review it and agree to appear, you need to schedule a mutually acceptable time for you to record the episode, which involves emailing back and forth until you nail the timing down. I added the package that I sent to my guests, which is in the link below. Basically has information about the podcast, some of the information that I need from them, and the questions, of course. Like I said, it's in the description below. After I have scheduled the date and time, I have all my guests sign an agreement regarding my ability to use the recording how I like. So they don't sue me for any reason after, and I have the legal rights to edit the episode and use it as I please. In order to get the document signed, I use DocuSign for this because it's amazing, simple, and very easy to use. Now, getting an agreement to record is a step that is recommended, and some podcasters say it is not necessary, but as I am taking you through the steps I take for each episode, and given the fact that I'm a lawyer, it would borderline be irresponsible for me to not have this step. Is the agreement perfect? Definitely not. If it were up to me and I was sending this agreement to a company, it would be a hectic 10-page agreement which covers every little detail and nuance with respect to the recording and my rights as the host. But as I'm sending this to individuals, I have the absolute bare minimum. So it's easy to digest, does not require them to hire a lawyer to review, and is not really controversial, but just enough for me to use the recording and not get sued for it after the fact. You can check out the draft I use in the description below, but full disclaimer, make sure if you do use it, tweak it to your use case and have a lawyer review it based on your podcast. If you have any questions about this, contact me. My information is also in the link below. Now that we are done with sealing the deal and getting the guest to agree to come and share their experience and knowledge, let's move on to what goes on recording day, which used to be a dreadful day for me. Now I have my handy dandy checklist, so it's not that big of a deal. But without that, I was sweating and constantly eyeing down my cameras to make sure they were up and running during the recording. Well, that's why I created it. Before my guest appears at the studio, I go through my checklist, which differs depending on whether it's an audio podcast, remote podcast, or video podcast. But for this video, we'll be discussing the video podcast checklist. You can get a copy of my checklist in the description below. If you like my process and want me to make a video for the audio and remote version as well, please comment below and I'll do that. So the items on the checklist are quite simple. But on the day of recording, there are lots of moving parts and I don't have staff or employees. So that means me, myself, and I got to do it all. Accordingly, my main man is this checklist. So I'll take you through why these are here. It would definitely help if you download this and you go through it as I explain why each item matters. So in the section, night before, I have to do a few things. So I have a document with a bunch of questions on it. So I need to put them on another laptop, an iPad, or some other device which I can use during the podcast recording itself because my main laptop is connected to the Rodecaster Pro. On my checklist, I call this additional laptop the ancillary laptop as I was using my wife's Mac in the beginning. Alternatively, you can simply print out the questions and get a pen. In the beginning, I used to have the ancillary laptop with questions on it, but turns out I actually like using the pen and paper a lot more now. Anyways, if you're going to use a laptop or any other device to help you remember what questions to ask during the interview, make sure it's charged. Another thing to make sure is that you load all the questions onto the ancillary laptop so you can actually access the questions on the laptop. As I said, this was my wife's Mac, so I used to send an email from my laptop and then download it onto the ancillary laptop. But now, as I print the questions out, that step is no longer needed. Moving on, you need to test each camera and mic to make sure they are working. So I added this step because before one of the recording days, one of my mics crapped out on me and I had to get another mic. So now I purchased an external mic just in case, but the only way you would know that is if you check each camera to make sure it turns on and check each mic to make sure the audio is going through to the recording device, which I do by turning on my Rodecaster Pro and I just tap the mics and watch the bar go up and down. Moving on, under audio, I have a Rodecaster Pro 2. In the beginning, I didn't really realize all the necessary settings to make sure audio was actually coming in. So the first item where it says Rodecaster Pro channels are correct in green, it's there because you have to press the button at the bottom of the channel with the ear on it. Because otherwise, even if all the connections are correct, no audio will come through because it kind of serves like a gate. So by correct, I mean that the channel for the first mic is highlighted in green and I have the second mic connected to the furthest input, so number 4 is also highlighted in green. As mentioned, first you check for each channel at the bottom of the Rodecaster screen. It should be highlighted green, and then you tap the mics, and the green bar in the correct channel should go up and down as you tap it. So after I've gone through the checklist items for the Rodecaster Pro, I have to somehow get the audio onto the laptop. Now, how everything is connected is essentially, so you speak into the mic is connected to an XLR cable, which goes to the back of the Rodecaster Pro. Then the Rodecaster Pro has a USB-C cable, which is connected to the laptop. And then through that connection, you will get audio from the mic into your laptop. So you open up GarageBand, it'll start with an empty project. So you click here, press choose. Over here, I've been using this, but typically it is not connected right off the bat to main multitrack. But so you have to click here on the arrow and make sure that the output and input device is Rodecaster Pro 2 because that's the audio device I have. If you purchase a different medium, then you would select that here. So for me, I select the main multitrack, shut this off here, then press create. And what that essentially does is create a single layer. So for just one speaker, right? You need another speaker. So you would press here, same exact thing. This should already be selected the second time around. Just press create. I typically label mine, so it's just easier to know who's who. Omer's mic. And then over here, I would say guest mic. And then next it says create channel input 3 is Omer's mic. So then you have to actually assign this and what channel is it essentially connected to. So this is number 3 here, and then this is number 6. So you might be wondering, what's with the numbers? So I didn't create the scheme. Essentially what it is, on the back of the Rodecaster Pro, input 1 shows up as 3 here. And so input 2 on the Rodecaster shows up as 4. Input 3 on the Rodecaster shows up as 5. And input 4 shows up as input 6. So for me, I have mic 1 connected to input 1 on the Rodecaster Pro. And then I have the guest mic connected to input 4. So that's why for me, I have to assign my mic 3. And for the guest mic, I have to assign it 6. Okay, moving on. Then it says tap the mic to check audio is coming onto the correct GarageBand channel. So then I walk over to each mic and I just tap it and I'll go like tick, 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 tick. And that should make the green bar, which you see over here for Omer, first go off. And then I go over to the guest mic and I do the same exact thing. And that essentially just means that audio is being detected and it will come into the Rodecaster Pro. On GarageBand, the metronome and the other purple setting is turned off. So that's this here. I don't know what it is. That's why I call it the other setting, but you don't need it. But you have to turn it off, because if you don't turn these two things off, you will essentially get this tick, 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 tick techno beat over all of your audio. And so imagine that you record an episode and there's techno beat going in the background. So you make sure you turn that off. That's why I have that here. Then on GarageBand, you have to turn record enable is a setting. So you get that by holding Option and T down at the same exact time. And then this little window pops up on there. You hit record enable. And when you do that, you'll see this record button shows up. So if you take it off, then it disappears. Then if you press that, it shows up here. And the reason why this is important is because if you don't actually hit this, then it won't, it'll only record one layer, right? And so you obviously don't want that. You want audio to come in through both mics. You want both mics to be recorded, right? So you have to press this, and they're enabled if they are blinking. So now when I record, you'll see that the audio is coming from both the Omer's mic and the guest mic. Okay. And then on GarageBand, you hit the main record button. So essentially, you can turn this on whenever you want before the recording, of course. So you just hit this here. You can't forget to do this because obviously that's the most important part. You have to start recording. And so you just hit this and then you leave. And you don't need to do anything else on GarageBand so long as you've selected and gone through these settings. You're good to go and the audio will be coming here. And I typically do some mic checks. So I'll ask the guest to say something and then you'll see these waves come up. And then I'll walk over to my mic and I'll be like, pss, 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 test, test, test. And same exact thing will happen here. Then we move on to the video part of the checklist. Now, before I start here, you should know that I have a long form podcast. So my use case is for recording 3+ hour episodes in 4K quality. You may not need fans and extra wires if you are just recording, let's say 30 minutes to 1 hour episodes, but I'll explain why I have certain checklist items here. So firstly, I pop in the wired batteries because the Sony battery gets weaker and weaker over time, and there's actually a pretty solid chance that in a 3-hour long video recording, the battery will die. So if you are considering long form, it is definitely recommended that you get the wired battery. Then I pop in an SD card into each camera. I have 3 Sony ZV-E10s, so the SD cards go into there. Now, to format each card, you can technically format these on your computer, but after I experienced an issue with that method, I added a step to format the SD cards directly from the camera itself, and I no longer experienced that issue. The issue I was experiencing was that after I finished recording an episode, all three cards were not read on my Mac. So then I panicked because this happened after recording an episode. So if you can only imagine, it stressed me out. Anyways, I did some research, got this software called System Data Recovery, and recovered the data. Thank God. Again, this is CISDEM Data Recovery. Link to the software is in the link below, and trust me, this software is a lifesaver. If your SD card is damaged, you just run the software, it detects and recovers everything. But anyways, in order to avoid that scare, I began to format the SD card directly from the camera itself. To accomplish this, on the Sony ZV-E10, you hit the menu button, slide over to Setup 4, click on Format, and then press Enter. Then wait 30 seconds for the card to format. Now that I have formatted SD cards, I pop a tripod onto each camera, and then I set up the height and place it in a manner so it is locked onto the object of recording. So essentially where my guest would be sitting and where I will be sitting. Can't explain how important this part is because I have messed this one up too many times because I essentially just rushed through my checklist. So if you go through my podcast, you'll see at times some of the lighting in the back is showing, and that's because I did not correctly place the camera. In the editing process, you can't just make everything magically fit. So this really comes into play, especially if you're using a wide lens camera, which I no longer do, by the way. Anyways, after the camera is locked on the object, I always make sure that the mode of recording is in video and not picture or slow motion. It is very possible that you can record the entire episode in slow-mo. So this is an important step. Now, because I have a long form, I went through some growing pains, which was that my camera overheated and just shut off after an hour. Now, this happened twice. So check this out. The first time was on episode 1. Perfect, right? Right after I landed my first guest. After recording the entire episode, I obviously looked into the issue, and my research indicated that the fix was to turn the auto shut-off setting on the Sony ZV-E10. Essentially, Sony has this feature that if the camera is getting too hot, it will automatically turn off. According to YouTube and much research, if I turn this setting to high, I will no longer experience this auto shut-off issue. So this was simple. You go to each camera, click on menu, go to setup 1, then power setting option, then auto powers off temperature, and select high. Then press OK. I thought this would resolve the issue, and between episode 2 and 6, everything went smoothly until episode 7, where the camera shut off again. Man, I was pissed, as I was having a great interview. But anyways, we essentially took a break, talked about some random stuff, let the cameras cool down, and continued the episode. Now, to never let that happen again, I had to invest in a fan for each camera. And for each camera, I also had to get a long USB-C cable. The reason why I stress long is because I have a long form, so the fan needs to be on for all 3 hours as well. If you have a short form, you can simply charge the fans the night before and then pop them in. Long story short, for a long form, you need a USB-C cable that can reach each fan. So for me, I got 3 6-feet USB-C cables, and for each recording, I moved the Sony screen out of the way. Like this, then you take the fan, so that you just plug it in. Take the USB-C cable, the long one. I'm just showing this for these purposes, and you just plug it in, and then it's charged, and then you actually turn the fan on. And you gotta like hear it because it's really, really quiet. Since then, I have not had any issues, and I ran the camera for 4+ straight hours on multiple occasions to check. The fan worked, and the link to that is also in the description below. Moving on to lighting. That is a very simple setup for me because I am not a lighting expert. So I just did the best I could. This stuff was a major headache when I was trying to figure out what lights to get. I just wanted to make sure the area was well lit because without lighting, it looked really grim and dead. So I used 3 lights, 2 Elgato lights in the back because of the shadows that come in my white room. And I use a big GVM light in the middle, which is enough for me. The checklist for this is essentially a reminder to make sure all the lighting is connected to a plug and placed in the appropriate direction and turned on. After that, I have some miscellaneous things applicable to me. So I have to make sure the main computer, which is connected to the Rodecaster, is actually connected to a power outlet. The ring notifications are shut off. All cell phones and laptops are on mute, and the studio room door is actually shut. I forgot that once. That's why it's there. After all of that, I reviewed the entire checklist to see what is not checked off, and typically the only thing remaining is to hit the main record button in GarageBand to start the audio recording, and then hit the record button on all three cameras. I look to see the red outline on each Sony camera, and I check the computer screen to make sure the audio is coming through, and that's it. I always ask the guest to do a mic check. I do one for myself, and we're almost there. So, just a general theme, if you haven't noticed, my thought process with podcasting, especially because I do it myself, is that you have to remove as many potential issues as possible, because the last thing you want when your guest is over is to interrupt the interview because your SD card reached its limit, or your battery ran out of juice, or in my case, your Sony overheated twice. You don't want to go through all of the trouble of getting a guest only to mess up the recording. Anyways, going through the checklist forces you to make sure you go through each step, regardless of how simple that step is. If you have ideas or any suggestions on how to improve my checklist, let me know in the comments below, as I created these for myself and my use case, but as I am self-taught, I'm sure there can be tons of improvements. Anyways, after you have gone through the entire checklist, then we finally get to the best and most rewarding part of the podcast. Your amazing guest appears in person. You grab a glass of water. As in a long form episode, you get really thirsty. And then you have a little chit chat until the guest has settled into their groove. Because despite the guest knowing that they're coming onto a podcast, when they get there, some of them are uncomfortable or uneasy because they see all the cameras and the lighting, and I'm not sure why, to be honest, but I'm guessing they get nervous or anxious or something. For some people, it's their first time appearing on a podcast. And to be honest, there could be many, many reasons. And honestly, I really like the chatting part because you get to know the guest more and build some rapport. And I mean, if you think about it, if you didn't actually chit chat, it would be robotic. Welcome to the podcast. Sit down. Let's get started. That would be awkward. Anyways, after building some rapport with a guest, who, unless you've chatted with before to discuss the questions, you're speaking or meeting them for the first time typically. So you ask them when they're ready, and then after making sure for the 10th time that the record button on all the cameras is on and the audio is coming through the mics, you begin the interview. And then go through the entire list of questions or topics that you want to discuss during that episode. After the interview is done, you hit the record button on all the cameras and GarageBand to stop the audio and video recording. Now begins the steps after recording, which, if you are doing a long form, is quite an ordeal. So the first thing after any episode recording is getting the audio and video onto your computer or hard drive. So in terms of getting the audio saved onto your computer so you can then edit it, it's pretty simple. I use GarageBand, so I just click here on the headphone, and what it essentially does is it will select one track. And so it'll select all the audio for Omer. And then you just go to share and then export song to disk, and you save it wherever you want to save it. And then you press export. Then you do the same thing. You hit this, and then you go to the guest mic, share, export song to disk, done. And that's pretty much it. If you want to also do a layer, save a file with both speakers at the same time for whatever reason, you can just go to share, export song to disk, and it will record both of these combined as one audio file. In terms of getting the video onto the computer, it's a process, especially if you have a long form podcast. So let's get started. I have 3 video cameras, as one records speaker 1, the other one records speaker 2, and then wide angle lens records both speakers. So after recording, you first take out the SD card from each camera, and then you have to transfer the video files onto the computer. I purchased an adapter to insert all 3 SD cards into my laptop at the same time. But before I had that adapter, I had to insert one SD card at a time into my Mac and then drag the files onto my hard drive, wait about 15 to 30 minutes, and repeat for the other 2 SD cards until all video files were transferred onto the computer. Now, With all 3 cards connected at the same time, I drag all the video files onto my computer at the same time and wait until they are done. I typically just go eat because I'm starving after a 3-hour interview. Because I have a long form podcast and each episode is between 1.5 to 3 hours and I record in 4K, the files are ginormous. For instance, the file size for each camera ranges between 40 and 90 gigs. So the 3 files together are usually over 180 gigs when including all the audio and video files. Because the files are so huge, I then had to look into how to compress them and make them smaller without sacrificing quality. So I got this software called Mac X Video Converter Pro, which you have to pay for, but it's pretty clutch. You can technically do this in Adobe Premiere Pro as well, but I've gotten inconsistent results, so instead I just started using Mac X Video Converter Pro. So to use Mac X Video Converter Pro, it's a software that you download and you just open the application. Then you drag whatever files that you want to compress. So let's say these 3, you just drag them, all 3 of them here. It takes a little bit of time because these are really large files. As you can see, this interview was 2 hours, 38 minutes, and 14 seconds long. And then you just select which profile. I leave it at 4K MP4 video. Then you hit done. Then you have to make sure you use the high quality engine and you select the interlacing. And then you just go wherever you want to save it. You just press open there and then you hit run. And it takes however long the episode is, it will take that long to compress. So for each file, it will take 2 hours, 38 minutes, and 14 seconds roughly. Sometimes it's a little bit faster, but I've noticed it's roughly around that time. So for this podcast episode, that would be 2, 4, 6, 7 and a half, like almost 8 hours just to compress all 3 files. Anyways, the fruit of this application is that it takes each massive file and compresses it to around about 1/4 of the original size without sacrificing the quality. So for a 60 gigabyte file, it brings it down to 12 or 13 gigs. This is really important for 2 reasons. Firstly, when you are editing almost 200 gigabytes, your computer is bound to slow down. So compressing it and then editing it allows for a smoother editing process with less hiccups and beach balls. Secondly, now I get my episodes edited from someone else, as it was taking me way too long to edit an episode thoroughly. So in order to send it to my editors, I needed to compress the file because otherwise it would take a very long time to upload 200 gigabyte files. Regardless, after compression, it is still 60 to 80 gigs. And although I would love to upload it through Google Drive, you just can't. The upload fails after a gig or 2. In order to accomplish uploads of that size, I had to get a subscription to WeTransfer, which allows for huge files to get uploaded. I've added a link to their service as well in the description below. You can also get Dropbox and some of the other premium services, but they all require some sort of payment. Anyways, now that we have discussed getting the files onto the computer, now comes the editing process, which used to take the longest time. And to be very honest with you, is brutal because editing a podcast is not really entertaining. It's quite redundant, but thank God for some technology because certain tools have really saved my life. So now that we're here to actually edit a file, I'm not going to go into in-depth detail, but I want to show you the bare minimum that you can do to get your episode up on YouTube. So we open Adobe Premiere, and Adobe Premiere 2024 it has some things that really make the editing process much better. For instance, you can delete all filler words and pauses automatically. And that's something that you couldn't do in 2023, and they added that in 2024, and it's a game changer. I'll show that to you. So you start with a new project. Let's go test 04 and then create. And then, so this is how I have my workspace set up, but everyone's will look slightly different. But for today, I need the text here. This is where I dump all my files, and this is where the media will come after. So I go to audio files. All I really care about is Nathan and Ameritrack only. Actually, no, I always create a bin called audio files. And then I also create a new bin called video files, and then I will take Nathan, and then I'll dump it into there, and then I'll do the same thing with video files, and then Omer, Nathan. Great. Okay, this can go. Then essentially the next step that you have to go through is you have to synchronize the audio that came from the mics to the audio that came through the camera audio. So I'll show you. Let's just drag Omer here, and then so this is the video file, but I always like to record the audio on the camera as well, because then it's much easier to synchronize. So I will take Omer track only. I'll dump it down here. Then what we want to do is we want to synchronize this video file with this audio file. And that's currently not how it is. So what you do is you first unlink these two, because whenever you bring them in, they'll be linked. So you unlink, then you select this one, then hold shift, and then select this one. Then you right click, go to synchronize, and then wait. Press OK, and it'll just do this. This takes a little bit of time because these are lengthy clips. So now the audio and the video has actually synced. So you can see I'm going to mute the audio from the mic, and the lips and the audio should come out correctly. If it starts heating up, it just shuts off. Yeah, so that works. Now I no longer need this audio layer. I'll bring this up. Oh yeah, that's muted. Okay, perfect. Now I'll link these back. That way it's just easier later. And let's bring this here. Okay, now we do the same thing for the other. Now let's make sure that Nathan's audio is good. So let's mute the video. Let's mute my other layer, and yep, sounds great. So now we delete this, and then let's bring this up. Link. Okay. Now, I didn't know this before, and it's kind of common sense, but obviously I was new to this. But the mic should be really close to the actual mouth of the speaker. And the closer it is to the speaker, the thicker these bars are, the frequencies essentially. And that means more audio was picked up from the mic. And when more audio is picked up from the mic, first of all, it's cleaner, and you can lower the gain, and that'll actually sound lighter. So if it's recorded loud, that's fine. But if it's recorded soft, it's not good. It's difficult. It doesn't sound great. And so one thing I would recommend is you tell your guest not to have the mic too far from their mouth, because if you watch episode 5, which is the PGA golf coach, he was speaking really far from the actual mic, like almost like this far, and maybe even further. And what that ended up doing was creating really poor audio quality. And I tried fixing it. I even sent it to a sound engineer, and it's pretty much like a bad episode, and I got to accept that. And trust me, that sucks. But anyways, you can start transcribing, by the way. It's a very helpful feature. I'm going to do this so while I do the other process, you can see. But this creates a transcript, which will help us for an upcoming process. Anyways, moving on. Now, in order for you to edit a podcast for YouTube purposes, the main thing you actually need to accomplish is camera switching, which is basically when the guest is speaking, the screen shows the guest, and when I'm speaking, the screen shows me, right? So back in the day, you had to do this process manually, but now it's 2024 and we have beautiful software solutions that have been brought by other people, and thank you so much. And the one that will save you so much time is AutoPod. So let me show you how you would have to do this manually before if you wanted to switch, do camera switching. You would have to select this. There's a few ways to do it, but this is the basic way. You would basically cut hair, and then suppose Nathan was speaking and then Nathan stopped speaking here. You would come here and you would click there, enable, pretty much disable. And then as you can see, it would go from Nathan, because he's on top and enabled, to over here because the top is disabled. Then I will show up. And this is what you had to do manually for the entire episode. So you can imagine it was quite a slow process. So anyways, now that we have technology, what you have to do is you have to use it well. Now, in order to use AutoPod, it has some rules, right? You have to make sure that it starts at the same exact place. So this cannot happen. This starts here at 4 seconds. This starts at 6 seconds. They all have to start at the same time. So you come here and you snip the beginning, and ripple delete essentially just closes the gaps between disjointed layers. And then you go to the end and you have to make sure that it ends at the same exact time. So let's just go here, here, here. Select all, delete, right? I think I know. Unlink. Okay, now this is amazing. All you do is, well, actually another thing, there's one step that you should do before, because otherwise it's a headache later. You want to make sure that these guys fit the frame properly. So as you can see, there's a light there and you can see a computer here. You definitely don't want that. So you zoom in, right? So the framing is good. Let's make this 75%. No. Yeah. And so that's good. Like he's somewhat centered. Let's go there. This doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just showing you right now. But when you're actually editing it, this should be perfect. So you use these guiding lines. You bring them down to the middle and, you do it right. Then you go up to Umair. So in order to do that, you have to bring the bottom layer to the top. Double click. Also, again, you can see there's a light in the back and there's the logo showing there. And then there's also this camera showing here, which is recording the other guy. And there's also my laptop right here. Anyways, I don't want any of that stuff, right? I just want this guy right here. Look at that. Okay, so now I have placed this guy in frame as well. Okay, now what you do is you literally just go to Window, Extensions, Multi-Camera Editor, and then you select who's who. This is Umair and this is Nathan. Okay, so you have to actually go through the settings. Standard is cutting method. I don't like standard. I like enable, disable. So remember when I was showing you that you have to click on enable and then it will disable it? Well, that's a better way to cut, because if there is a mistake, then you can just right click and enable it again. So I like using enable, disable. You can try out and do whatever you like. In terms of delay cuts, this is just how quickly it'll happen. So let's just leave that. And if you want to ignore cuts that are too short, so it doesn't just randomly keep switching up on you, suppose this was like 0.5 seconds. So even if the screen switched for 0.5 seconds, it would switch the cameras, which looks really glitchy. So I typically put it 2 seconds. Now you have to basically just assign who is sitting at A1, who is sitting at A2, who is sitting at V1, and who is sitting at V2. So in audio layer 1, we have Umair. So you just type in Umair. Audio layer 2 is Nathan by common sense. And then V1 is Umair. And then V2 is Nathan. And then if you had a third camera, you would just, there would be a V3 here, and then you would just press all speakers, and then it just would cut accordingly whenever there's audio coming from both. Anyways, you press create multi-cam edit. Now you get to watch this magic. Just watch here. Will you look at that? Oh my goodness. If you haven't done this before, you don't know why I'm so happy. But that's it. It's cut the entire episode for you. Done. And so when the audio was coming from Nathan's mic, it will switch the camera. And then when I'm talking, it will just switch over to there. And so, I mean, it is so useful. As you can see, it did that so fast. We sped it up for you, but that was done over 1:45, which is pretty fast. If you had to do that manually, I would say, I mean, I'm not a pro, but I'm guessing other people can do it at a faster rate, but it would take me for almost an hour and a half episode. I'd say about 2.5, maybe 4 hours, somewhere between 2.5 and 4 hours just to cut it, right? Because you have to snip it in the beginning and then snip it when it ends. And then you have to do the same thing for the second layer. And then you have to enable, disable manually. And sometimes you make mistakes. So then you go back and it's such a lengthy, annoying, arduous. Anyways, thank you, Autopod. It's $30, but trust me, for the amount of time it saves you, it's just, to me, it's free. I mean, if you can save me 4 hours, you're magic. But anyways, after that, what you do is, remember I mentioned that you set up the transcript? The reason why I do the transcript is because whenever you're on a podcast, there's times when nobody's speaking and there's a lot of filler words like and and so Adobe 2024, not 2023, just 2024. So if you have the old versions, you would have to update just for this feature, and it's so worth it. So you pretty much just go here, you select filler words, and you can just delete them all at the same exact time. And you press delete, lift. So if you just extract, it's the faster way to do it, but there's a downside to it as well. So I'll show you both. So I've selected all of the filler words in the entire episode. And if I press lift, it will go through and delete all of them. So now you'll see gaps. So there was a filler word here, there was a filler word here, and you'll see throughout the entire episode, there's tons, right? Now, if I make a mistake, right? If Adobe made a mistake and took out a filler word, which actually wasn't a filler word, right? It was, we were talking, but Adobe's computer software thought that, that was a filler word. So it deleted it. I could just literally do this and it would put the old footage back. All the audio, all the video, just like it was. Now, if I do that, if I did the same exact thing, but I extracted it, it doesn't allow me to do that. When it deletes all of them, it essentially also does something called ripple delete, which is join the two layers, connect them back, right? So if there was a mistake, suppose there was a filler word here and it deleted it, it joined the layer for me. So I can't fix that mistake again. So for a lengthy podcast especially, that's a major, major headache. So I select the filler words, then I go delete, click lift, delete all. And then as I'm actually reviewing for all the other things, then I just go through and manually ripple delete if the filler word is accurately removed. And I also do the same thing for pauses. So I will go, but I select my settings. So I go to search settings here after clicking on the filter. Then I go to transcript view. I make it 1.5 seconds because if you cut too close, it starts sounding a little artificial. So I only cut out lengthy pauses. This is completely up to you how long of a pause you want to tolerate for your viewers. I have an audio and video. So for the audio people, I feel like it would be a better listening experience if you actually cut out some of the lengthier pauses. So that's why I do this. So I just press start. It will highlight every single one for you. Again, you just press delete, lift, delete all. And as you can see, it deletes it as well. After removing all of those, I go through each episode, finding what clips I would like to use for the intro, to add B-rolls and any text as necessary. I find the video chapter markers for the show notes so people can just skip to the exact part that they want to. So suppose like it's a long form at the end of the day. So suppose my audience only care about how much money somebody earns in this particular profession. So I have the chapter markers for that purpose. They can just look through them and they'll be like, oh, here's the salary. I'll just click here and then they can go to that area. And so that really helps. And it's in the audio as well. And pretty much after that, there's a whole bunch of things that, like I said, it takes time, right? So as you actually go through, you can mark. So suppose I want to mark, oh, this area here seems like a good short. So I'll just mark here, right? And a little mark shows up, and then I'll mark here, and then another mark shows up here, and then I'll continue. And the same thing, typically I get a pen and a piece of paper, and I write down what I actually liked from that area as well. So later I don't have to think, and it's just a little bit faster of a process. And you do that for the entire episode. And while I go through it, I also ripple delete these, all these gaps if they sound normal. If they sound abnormal, then like I said before, you would go through and then actually fix it. Honestly, since I got the editors, podcasting has been a lot more fun, because before, when I used to do it myself, I used to wake up at 5, start working on the episode, then continue editing it on the train on the way to work. Then I would be at work for 8 to 10 hours. And then on the way back, you're exhausted. You really don't want to edit a Premiere file. So I would do that until the episode is fully edited. So for me, given the limited amount of days that I had to work, it would take me somewhere between 3 to 5 days before. This was before I discovered Autopod, but even after I discovered Autopod, there's all the other things that you have to do, like add the chapter markers, the B-rolls, create an intro, outro. And you don't have to. It's just something I personally wanted to do because I want a particular standard for the episodes, but it's not necessary to add an intro. I would say the outro is not necessary either, especially if you have a long form, but I wanted to do it. And so it's a little bit extra work, and that's the cost. But anyways, now that you have actually edited the entire episode, you pretty much just go to export, and for me, the format is H.264, which will come out as an MP4. It's already saved. You can technically just connect to YouTube here and upload it here as well, but I don't do that for other reasons. But yeah, you just press export because I want to save the file and all that stuff. Sometimes the export feature doesn't work. So if it doesn't work, then you click on send to media encoder, and then it'll do it over there. But after you press export, it'll save wherever you did it. This will take time, so I'm not going to show you because it takes like somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes to do it. And yeah, we're done. After a lot of steps, it is finally time to upload the hard work to YouTube, which takes a very long time when it comes to uploading HD and 4K. So I just leave it on in the background, and while it's uploading, I prepare my YouTube thumbnail and draft a description for the episode and insert the chapter markers. The thumbnail is something I create on Adobe Photoshop, but that is not necessary, so feel free to make it with whatever tools at your disposal. After inserting the description, uploading the thumbnail, and going through the YouTube settings, you choose when to make the episode public and then submit. Done. Now, I know this video does not have all the detail in the world because, to be honest, each one of these steps can be a tutorial, and that is why people make comprehensive courses. But I wanted to create this video because I remember when I was starting off, I didn't even know what to think or what questions to ask. I simply tried stuff, then made a mistake, Googled the mistake, and found out how to solve it, and just kept repeating until a good work product came out. That process created like 6 months of mistakes. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned from my mistakes. If you haven't already, please also hit the subscribe button. And also, if you have a comment on how to improve my system or anything regarding the quality of a podcast, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in.